All right, hello everyone. Welcome to Good Stuff. My name is Kevin Bille, and I'm glad you're going to be spending some time with us today. I'm really happy to announce today's guest, Brian Kight. Brian, it's great to have you.
Great to be here, Kevin. I appreciate you having me on. And under the circumstances, some of the new, odd, different ways we do things are actually presenting a lot of really cool opportunities.
Yeah, for sure. And that's definitely what this is. I know we were talking a little bit earlier. We talked a little bit before via Twitter. I'm a huge fan, which you know by now. So I can't wait to see what you have in store for our listeners today. I guess for the people that don't know your path, these businessmen and women, these coaches, these leaders that are listening, and maybe they're not sure of everything you do. Can you kind of enlighten us with that and start there, please?
Yeah, so I'll go. I'll do the quick version. Grew up in California and played. Football was my sport growing up, and I was blessed with I would call it a medium amount of talent. I wasn't talentless, but for the sport of football, I wasn't blessed with the talents that football needs. Right, so I was undersized. I was quick but not fast. But I loved the sport, and so I learned how to compete. I learned how to, I think for like a lot of us, I learned a lot of really core lessons in sports. And for me, that sport was football, and that sport took me to college. I played college football, where I was still the smallest person on the field every time, and that was really my introduction, Kevin, to sort of where the heartbeat of my business now comes to, and that was I recognized in college in particular. I was aware of it in high school, and then I fell in love with it in college, that talent was not a great predictor of success, and that there was something other than talent that could move the needle of intense competition and who was actually the best. There was something other than talent. And it never made sense to me when people called those things intangibles, because I always viewed them as very tangible, very teachable skills. And I also recognized that the most undercoached profession in America was coaches. And it's ironic, right? Right. And so I was not a good student in high school or college, meaning I just didn't try, but I did go all in on sports. And then after college, I put all my chips in on coaching coaches. I wanted to teach leadership and culture and behavior skills to coaches so that they could match the quality of their leadership, culture, and behavior skills, right? The mental skills, the things that drive human beings. They could match the quality of those systems with the quality of their sport specific systems, right? And I tried that as an entrepreneur my first year out of college, and I completely failed. I got 0 clients. I didn't even get a second meeting from a coach, which is a very humbling experience. And that was my start. From there, I transitioned over to business, and I just wasn't good enough at the time. I was 22, 23, and trying to start a sort of a leadership training consulting practice for coaches. I wasn't good enough. Coaches weren't receptive, and I just think it was a little ahead of its time. This was around 2004, 2005. And so, but business did a lot of it. Business had devoted budget to it. Business had devoted learning tracks. They did a ton of that. And so I went over and I joined my dad's company. He was a one-man shop at the time. I joined with him. He had 2 really cool rules. I actually love sharing this. We don't work together now, but we did for 15 years. And he was, my mentor for, taught me everything about how to get good in this business. And he had 2 rules when I joined his company. He said, his company was him, right? He said, number 1, you don't make any money until you make me money. And number 2 was, if it's ever between the client and you, I'm picking the client. And that was his way of showing me that production matters. Effort is nice, intentions are good, but good intentions without production, your business is dead. And so he made sure that I understood I had to be a productive member, and that the client was who we were serving. And that if a client didn't like me, didn't think I was good enough, or I couldn't hang, that I was going to the curb. And I'm appreciative that he did that, because, he threw me into the pool, and we went and we worked in hospitals, manufacturing firms, accounting firms, banks, basically every business, and I worked all over the world, nonprofits, basically the furthest I could get from sports. And that was for a decade. I ended up taking over as CEO about 9 years in or so. And then right around the time I took over as CEO, we met Urban Meyer at Ohio State. And that was our first sports client. Our first true sports client was Urban in Ohio State, which was probably not the ideal sports client to start the sports practice with, but or at least in terms of the stakes. So they were really high from the beginning. But it was for me, it was a decade later of where my heart and my dream was from the beginning. I just had to go 10 years in the business space first to be able to get good enough, so to speak, to be able to get the opportunity in the sports side, and with obviously a university like Ohio State, a brand like their football team, and a coach as successful as Urban. And then from there, the success at Ohio State and the use of our tools in a lot of that success really opened the platform up to coaches all over the country. Obviously, he had a book that came out that was super heavily based on the work that we did, and a lot of it that my dad did at Ohio State. And then from there, I kind of transitioned over all into to the sports and the entrepreneur side. And about a year ago, I left Focus 3 and stepped out into what I'm doing now, which is really two things. And that is building up the Daily Discipline brand, which is a daily email that I write Monday through Friday at 6 a.m. Eastern, building up that community and that resource. And then also the core content of what I do myself, specifically for sports teams at the high school, college, and pro level, and then focusing on entrepreneurial businesses, growing businesses. Whereas Focus 3 is really focusing on more enterprise type businesses, large scale implementations for, say, like school districts and Fortune 500s, et cetera.
Right. Yeah, it's great. And I don't know if I heard you say it or not, because I know we were talking earlier once again, but
Yep.
We got a lot of listeners from Ohio. So you did attend College of Worcester. So I'm sure a lot of people can resonate with that. So was it an easy decision to work, I guess, in the family business? I mean, your dad had a lot of years of being I would say, a major influence on people and businesses. Mm-hmm. So did you ever think about going a different direction, or was that kind of what you thought of right from the get-go after that 1 year of those failures? Is that what it led to?
No, the path was actually really interesting. It was not an easy decision. I was actually always, for the most part, I would say I was more against working in the family business, because of all the things that can come with working in a family business and some of those things. So my actual path was, see if I can remember the chronology of this. I came from context. I grew up in California, San Diego and Los Angeles. College football was what got me to Worcester. So I actually did 1 semester at Worcester, dropped out of college, moved back to LA, lived in LA, waited tables, and actually did acting for a year in LA after, at 18, 19 years old. After that sort of 1 year off, sort of kind of that gap year, right? But I did a semester first, played football that year, went back to Worcester, graduated. And at the end of graduation, I was getting ready to actually start the sports side of what I was doing. I was all in. And probably in the last 2 months before I graduated, I had a friend in California who offered me to stay in his house in California on the beach where I grew up. And so literally like a month before graduation, I called my dad and said, hey, I'm not going to join the business. I'm going to go to California and I'm going to live on the beach, because I don't know how often you get opportunities like this to go back and, and it's Manhattan Beach, it's paradise. And 22-year-old me was very attracted by that. So I actually we had plans to start the sports side kind of together. And then I dropped them at the very last second. I went out to LA, lived in LA. I did recruiting, IT recruiting. This is 2005. Did IT recruiting for 6 months, and absolutely hated it. I was in an office all day on like the 23rd floor, and I was banging the phones, hard time, like super hard cold calling. And I knew like 2 weeks in that I had made a terrible decision. But I was not going to leave until I closed deals and actually performed in the role. I made a decision. I wasn't allowed to quit the job until I performed in that job. And it was important to me. So I did that for 6-8 months, and then moved back to moved back to Ohio. And that was when I started doing the sports thing and kind of did that. I was trying to do that kind of for a while. I was trying to do it independent, where my dad and I were kind of together partners on, we believe in a lot of the same things. And obviously I was 22, 23. So, he was a mentor for me. But I was kind of trying to do some independent without becoming like an official member of his business. And then, I was unsuccessful at getting anything off the ground. And so then I somewhat reluctantly, it's actually an interesting question. I somewhat reluctantly joined the business because one day Kemba Financial Credit Union, big credit union in Ohio, he had double booked himself or had 2 opportunities, and he couldn't speak at an event for Kemba. And he asked me if I wanted to do the keynote. It was like a 2-hour keynote, all staff, 200 people. And in my young, naive confidence, I said, sure, yeah, of course I will, no problem. And so that was my first work gig, was doing a 200-person, 2-hour keynote for Kemba Financial Credit Union. And I fell in love with it in the first 10 minutes of addressing that all staff. And the second I did that, I was like, I'm all in, let's go.
Yeah, that's great. And so I'm sure that brought you a lot of joy, and you can see where that passion lies. So with some of these topics that you're seeing with sports teams and businesses, I got to think one of the first ones is culture, that comes up, this buzzword, if you will. Mm-hmm. I guess a kind of a 2-part thing. And I know one of these, I've read a document that you've created, but what are some things that I guess someone can do on a daily basis, whatever their role is, that's going to continue to improving the culture? And then the second part of that would be, what are some mistakes that you're seeing right now in terms of people building culture, whether that's coaches like you mentioned, or once again in the business world?
Yeah. Let's start with mistakes. I think Kevin, I break, behavior is such a huge piece, right? Like behavior is the most complex variable in the world. It's infinitely more complex than the most complex of our businesses. You look right now, while we're recording this, right, we're all on this quarantine lockdown from Corona. But the big variable in the country and the world right now is people's choices, right? And their behavior. And that's the big thing you can't dictate anything, because no matter what you tell people, they still are going to make choices, right? You look at, there's people protesting, and there's people who are ignoring this. There's other people who are obeying every single rule as if they walk outside and breathe the air and they're going to get sick. And none of it probably makes rational sense. And everybody's making different decisions. Like, some people are going to put themselves in potentially dangerous situations just because they don't want to be in their house anymore. That's a behavioral and emotional dynamic that is wildly complex. And then replicate that over 330 million Americans, and we start to see why the situation is really challenging for us. So the reason I mention that is because, behavior can actually be simplified down to 3 things: what we do, what we don't do, and how we do it. And that's culture's job, is to guide that. Culture's job is to guide, here's what we do, here's what we don't do, and here's how we do it. It's not culture's job to make everybody feel great. It's not culture's job to, protect people's emotions and feelings. And that's probably one of the biggest mistakes that people make in culture, is they create a culture that by trying to be so by trying to be everything to everyone and have no people feel anything other than delight and unicorns, is they end up having a culture for nobody because it doesn't stand for anything. It doesn't raise a standard. And the way you see this is you'll see this more often than not. You'll see it, and this is one of the core mistakes. You'll see it in a core value list that a team or a company will put together, and you'll read through the core value list and some kind of a description, and it ends up just being a big word salad. It's like how many different phrases and words can we squeeze into one run-on definition sentence of respect? Yeah. And what happens is it's actually, and people think this sounds harsh, but I want people to understand the gravity of it. It ends up becoming a worthless element. Literally, it becomes the opposite of value. It carries no worth. It's a display. But it doesn't do anything. So the big thing in culture is that it needs to guide more behaviors that we want you to engage in, right? That's what culture's job is. It's to drive more of the behaviors that we want people to engage in. So, on a sports team, your culture needs to drive more work in discretionary time. It needs to drive more attention to detail on elements that matter. It needs to drive more close, connected, trusting relationships. Then culture has to drive less of the things that would derail us or cause us to fail, right? So culture needs to drive less. Like, for example, I've got right here, right? Let me see if I can get my hand right now.
Yeah, there you go.
All right, we got this BCD, right? So culture needs to drive less blaming, less complaining, less defensiveness. Because the presence of blaming, complaining, defensiveness, the more that goes up, the more ownership and responsibility and performance goes down. So if your culture does not treat BCD as something that needs to get removed, like a cancer, what's your culture doing? Like it's not serving a purpose. And then I think the unique side of culture, and this is where style comes in, is how we go about it. There is no right or wrong. We were talking D3 football, right? There's a guy named Frosty Westering. He was a football coach. He wrote a book called Make the Big Time Where You Are. And the guy, when I studied in college, we talked a bunch in college. I didn't play for him, but I did some studies around coaching, and he was one of the guys that I talked a lot to. And he was love, right? Like he was all love. He would literally would stop practice and the whole team would have popsicles. They actually had a rule while he was the coach. And this is, how strange is this? To walk onto or off of the field in a live game, you had to be holding hands with another player.
I like it.
Right. And that's a physical, and that's super, super tactical, and don't confuse that with culture. But he led from a place of love and experience and just a big heart. And he thought that was whereas Nick Saban doesn't lead through that, right? Nick Saban is a wildly successful coach, but he doesn't build a culture that's like Dabo Swinney's just down the road from me at Clemson. Clemson is super successful. Alabama's super successful. They build their cultures in different ways. Now, they both demand a lot of behavior to exist. They both eliminate a lot of behaviors that would derail them. But the last piece, the how, each of those guys completely committed themselves to creating the culture that they wanted, the way they thought it would make their team successful. And that's what I think all of us need to do, is we need to decide the cultures we're trying to create. And then to answer the second part of it, just a couple core things, right, to not do. Don't try to make everybody feel good. Don't worry about who you exclude, because everybody else has to make their own choices. There is no rule in culture that says the culture you build must fit for everybody. And in fact, that doesn't make any sense at all. The culture you build, everybody has to be okay in it. It's just not how it works. So it's okay if you don't want to fit in our culture, but I can't sacrifice the culture of our team or the culture of our organization, or for me, I can't sacrifice the culture of my company because somebody who I might hire is uncomfortable with the way we compete as a business. It's okay, but if you don't want to compete the way we compete, you need to join a company that competes the way you like. And the same thing with a team, and et cetera, et cetera. So I think we see that everybody gets all tied up in their emotions with this culture and fear hurting feelings. And I'm just a huge believer in let people make their own choices. I have to make mine, you have to make yours. And maybe we work well together, or maybe we don't, but we can both be really good people who just don't have the exact same standards on how we want to go about this work. I think life is way too short to work in a place and be on a team that you don't believe in. And it's definitely way too long to stay on one of those teams.
Yeah, for sure. I think this resonates so much with me, Brian, because I feel like this is a lot of the locker room talks maybe I've given before, or some of the office sit down talks to players or coaches. And so I totally get it. I'm totally invested into it and bought into it. I guess, I look at something that, the BCD or I love the doesn't matter, get better. I mean, that's something I use with my kids is harsh, and let's focus on that word. Doesn't matter, get better, blame, complain, defend. What would you say? Once again, 100% makes complete sense to me. And I'm not saying that, hey, I'm up here because of that, or, or vice. Yeah. But what about the people, we've got a lot of leaders on here that struggle with this. What would you say to the people that do take this as harsh and that they resist, they make excuses, they don't buy in, et cetera, et cetera?
I believe in two things around communicating to all people. I would phrase it in two ways, right? I believe in telling the truth with love, and I believe in high empathy with high expectations.
That's good.
I never want to deliver people the truth, but do it from a place where there's not love with it.
Right.
I never want my love for somebody to cause me to not tell them the truth. I just don't believe in that. And you see this a lot, where because I care about somebody, we hide and think we're protecting them from the truth. And we just cause a lot of damage. The other piece is I want to empathize with people, because people have real situations and real challenges, many of which I don't face. And I've got my own, but a lot of people are in situations I'm not in and maybe have never been in. But I'm never going to allow the level of my empathy to lower my expectations. I just don't believe that. With kids, I think the worst thing you could do for kids is, because they're going through something hard, lower your expectations for them. That's the worst thing you can possibly do. Or, and this is happening with a lot of kids who are coming from, a lot of kids with money right now are struggling with this side. And you see this in if you look at the suicide rates of high school kids, you'll see the suicide rates are disproportionately leaning towards kids who come from much higher socioeconomic status, right? And one of the drivers around that is who's getting the least amount of empathy with the highest level of expectations among high school students.
Yeah.
The rich kids. And they have what's happening is they've got all these expectations on them, and then they're not getting empathy because their mom and dad have money. It just doesn't work. So that's why I believe in communicating high empathy, high expectations. And if I've got high expectations, I'm also going to bring high empathy with it, and truth with love. So for the adults, okay, this is my message to them. Look, if you think that the more you blame, complain, and defend is a strategy that will work for you, go do it. Like if you genuinely believe that blaming, complaining, and getting defensive at your wife when she tells you something about yourself that you know to be true, if you think that deepens your marriage, go.
Guilty.
Right? Because the consequences will show up, and you'll get the data that tells you whether it works or doesn't. Like, it's very straightforward. So I'm not trying to convince anybody. My heart says I have something that I definitely want to encourage you for. But Kevin, look, we have the ability to make choice, and we're free to face the consequences. I believe in that for myself. I believe in that for you. I believe in that for anybody. So if somebody wants to say it was somebody else's fault, okay, I'm cool with that, as long as you're cool with the consequences that come with it.
Yeah.
Now, what happens is they're going to taste those, and they're going to feel those, and they're going to recognize BCD does not work, right? They're going to recognize that if people don't trust me, that I'm not going to be able to push them very hard or very far, and they're not going to uphold the standards that I want as a leader. Now, I would like that to be a less painful lesson as possible, but it's going to cost you something. It's either going to cost you the work up front in uncertainty where you're not sure if it's going to work out, or it's going to cost you the work on the back end where you fail, crash, or go into a really difficult place. Like the work is going to come in somewhere. It's just where the work is going to show up. So I'm less concerned with whether people buy in, and I'm more concerned with making sure that people know how to pay attention to cause and effect, and then they can learn lessons themselves. And I think everything reaches people in the right time, so to speak. Does that make sense? Like I think people get the lessons that they need when they're ready for those lessons to reach them. And for some people, and this is the hard part about the work for me, for some people, I mean, I speak to an audience of 100 or 1,000. I mean, I'm honest, I'm real. Out of 100 people, if I'm speaking to an audience, like maybe 10, are going to pick up the tools and run. Maybe.
Yep.
Like 50 of them are going to say, "Oh, that was good," and then they're not going to do an ounce of work around it. And then there's another 10 who think I was the worst speaker they've ever heard in their life.
Yeah, right.
Like that. Okay, that's the work. So I'm okay with people feeling cause and effect. It's the best lesson. It's the best teacher out there is cause and effect. E plus R equals O.
Mm-hmm.
Let them see it. I just want to put good tools in people's hands so that at the end of this, I can say to myself, people, one, got better because I chose to give. And then number two, to the extent that people didn't get better or lessons didn't get learned or stuff didn't get applied, it wasn't because I didn't do my job.
Right. Yeah, for sure. That's good stuff. I can sympathize with some of that just in my personal experience. And I guess, what I'd like to do here is I'd really like to bring light to some of these resources that you have to people. As we talked about, I mentioned your email probably every time I speak. I think it's a great email. I like the fact that it's consistent. I like the fact that it's short, it's to the point, it is results driven, and I think it holds me accountable. I think discipline, and I would be anxious to hear this from you and talking about this daily discipline email and the community and where they can find it and so on and so forth. But I mean, to me, that's a game changer for elite. I haven't been around maybe some guys that are going to be walking out on the stage tonight for the draft, but even at the level that I've been at or some of the other people that I've associated with, even on these phone calls now, I feel like discipline is a game changer. And just, I try to tell my kids, you have to embrace boring, guys. Embrace boring. It's hard to do the same thing and be disciplined every day over and over again. So, while you tell us a little bit about that email, can you speak to that a little bit? Is that something you would agree with?
Yeah, so the email you're talking about, it's called Daily Discipline. It started 3 years ago because the question I would get, after a session, a workshop, a keynote, wherever, sometimes it'd be live, somebody would come up to me afterward, or they would email me later, and they would ask the same basic question, and that is, how do I keep this alive? Like somebody was, it's like you go to and anybody who's ever been to a conference or an event has had this. You go to the event, you read the book, whatever it is, and you have this sort of injection of enthusiasm. And you're like, I'm all in. And then it's 3 months later and you've done almost none of it, right?
Yep.
And we've all felt that in some way, shape, or form. And so people would ask me, how do I keep it alive? And they didn't like the answer that I would give. And that is, you do it. Because I could give strategies, tactics, blah, 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 blah. But all of them start with the same thing. Like there's nothing I could tell somebody that would say, oh, here's how, and I'll come back to this in a second with the word habit, because I think there's a danger that's going on right now with habit, about why it's so popular. But everything starts with, you have to do it. So even if I were to give you a strategy or tactic, you would just, it's like a 2-year-old. Why? Why, right? You could just keep asking me, well, how do I keep that alive? Well, how do I keep that alive? Well, how do I keep that alive? And so what I said was, okay, rather than me give people an answer that they don't like, and then rather than me give them that answer and then not provide anything, I said, I'm going to take the excuses off the table. And I'm going to write an email Monday through Friday, and I'm going to send it out at 6 a.m. So anybody who wants to keep it alive you tell me, I want to keep it alive. I'll say, then sign up for this. Like if you want it, it's right there. And it's just an email and it's a read, but what it is it's a focusing system. It is some clarity. It, like you said, right? Like I work really hard to talk about things that are affecting me. And if they're affecting me, they're likely affecting a lot of people. And I try to speak that into people's lives. And, I challenge him. I think, you read, like I challenge a fair amount, right? It's not soft. And, it's like, I challenge people in there because if you signed up for it and you're reading it every day, it's because you want something out of it. And part of that is we got to feel some strain and struggle. So here's how I think about discipline. And I think this reflects what discipline actually is. And I could talk about the root word and Latin and blah, 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 all that stuff. And it's all relevant for me. And I teach it every now and then. But for our purposes, that's this. We have to redefine discipline for ourselves so that we can re-energize it in our life. And I think that flow is important. We have to redefine it before we can re-energize its role. And what discipline is choice. That's it. All discipline is choice. Because when you have discipline and you're in discipline, you are the one making the choices. Right? You. Now, you could be making the choices in a subordinate role, right? And you have kids? Right?
3 boys, yeah. Yep.
How old?
13, 10, and 4.
Okay, so 13, 10, 4. I have a 3-year-old boy, almost 4, so, kind of right in that window, right? Are your 13, 10, and 4-year-olds still in a spot where a large portion of their life is built around, obedience to you? Like
Correct.
with instructions, right? A lot of it, right? Right. And so there's 2 ways that your boys can go about obedience. They can go about obedience just as blind, doing what you say, not making any choices, and you make the choices and I do exactly what it is that you tell me to do. And they have no faculty, they have no involvement whatsoever. Or they can make the choice to be obedient young men and learn how to make those choices in the role that they are for you as sons. Which way would you prefer that they grow up if you had the choice, which you don't, by the way, because they're kids and they're independent, right? But if you had the choice, would you want them to grow up with obedience with no thinking or obedience where they chose it?
Yeah, right. The second
one. That's what discipline is. And then at some point, and I teach this to all coaches, at some point, your kids are not going to live in obedience to you. Same as mine. At some point, obedience is done. And now they are left with only their what? Choices. And when that happens, at 18, 21, 20, whenever that moment is, what we want them to have the skill to make great choices. And they're always going to make great choices. One, that are some things we trained into them. And then because they're individuals, they are always going to make choices and great choices for them that are not what we put into them because they are individuals. You did it. I did it. We're all doing it. So I want people to recognize discipline as a choice. And then with that, I think the second piece you said is really important from a redefine and re-energize is discipline looks like 360 degrees of kind of behavior. Discipline is fun, is high energy. Discipline is boring and low energy. Discipline is like really steady progress. Discipline is super slow, volatile, backwards. It's everything. I think the second we define discipline as this boring, lame, painful, like as soon as that's the description of discipline, we go back to the word you said, buy-in, right? Mm-hmm. Like if I came to you and gave you a pitch and said, or you came to me and gave me a pitch and said, hey, here's the number one skill I want you to build into your life. Do boring stuff a lot. I'm out.
Right.
Right. I'm done. Like, it doesn't matter what it is. I'm not doing that because it doesn't touch me. Right? It doesn't touch a part of me that moves. It's this. I want the ability to make the choice to do the boring stuff when I need to, but I also need the choice to choose the discipline of the energy stuff that I need to. Sure, I also need to choose how to make something boring exciting, which I can. So it's the choice, and then it's recognizing that discipline can be anything that we're choosing in the full spectrum of styles, not bucketing discipline as, I heard somebody say discipline is doing what needs to be done even when you don't want to do it. Mm-hmm. And again, what kind of life do you want to live? I want to live a life where I'm doing what I don't want to do, even though I have to. Like, nah.
Yeah, right. Yeah, again, and that's good for me to hear, obviously, with that. And I guess I think of my time as an athlete and then as a coach. I think a lot of people do get bored, so I think it is injecting that energy and that discipline. So maybe that's where it comes about.
Sure.
And so that's good. But yeah, for those of you that don't get the email, I would highly recommend it. It's really good. Another tool, the YouTube live that you're doing right now. I think you're on the third day, and the notes are down here. I've been paying attention to those as well. That's really good. And, I'd want to push people to that too, because I think that's really resourceful. I guess, I want to be respectful of your time here too, Brian. A couple questions, and then I'd like to go into kind of a rapid fire consistently that I like to call 3-pointers, since that's kind of what I shot back in the day. But
basketball.
One other thing I would want to know before those is, like, how do you grow? Like, how do you get better? What are some of your daily routines or habits that you feel are beneficial and would like to share with other people?
Yeah, I mean, I'm a big reader and note taker. So I read, and for me, the process of reading is an active process, not a passive process. So I don't I will not read a book unless I have a pen in my hand, right? Because for me, the process of reading something and not being able to engage with it on the paper, I don't do that very often. When I do, I kind of do it with like this air of like, like an air of like anxiety of like, oh man, but I'll read. I mean, I will legitimately read in an hour. Some days I'll read 3 pages of a book, and it'll take me an hour because I'll be writing, thinking, writing more notes, pull my pad out, so that's really big for me. I spend a lot of time in, I really carve out time in isolation. Like, I spend time myself. I'm a people person. I'm naturally interactive. I love to engage and connect, and like that's home base for me. But I also appreciate and need time alone during normal hours, or I should say during normal flow of work, which we're not in right now. I spend a ton of time on airplanes, right? And so for me, the airplane is, it might as well be my living room, and that's my reprieve where I'm just alone and I can just be by myself and think and not, entertain myself, or just, kind of be there. I think anything that causes me to, I think big with me is I read old books. So, this is, I don't know if you can see it here. Yeah, this is the Enchiridion, written by Epictetus in, 138. He died in 130 AD. So like 2000 years ago, right? I only read old books. So I actually don't read like any best-selling popular books that are out right now, because those books were designed to sell, and they were designed by people who had a product or did a study somewhere, and they were a professor and they wanted a big name so they could get more. And they're not books that have stood the test of time and been pressure tested across centuries and all kinds of different people groups. This book has survived for 2,000 years with the truth in it, which means for you and me and anybody else means what? The truth that's in this book has been relevant and real and worth building on for how long?
Yeah.
Not just 2,000 years, but everything that's happened over those 2,000 years. Whereas, a book like Grit or a book like Growth Mindset, while popular and great, a book like Grit that says if you work harder for longer and you don't quit and give up, you're more successful than other people. I didn't need a researcher to tell me that, right? These other books taught it a lot better than somebody in a lab created it. So I'm a big believer in reading truth that's been around for a long time, that has worked, been pressure tested. It had failure opportunities, and it showed itself to not be put down by those. And it was written by people who actually had feet on the ground and skin in the game with what they were teaching, and less so by, people who are,
right,
writing from the comfort of a lab, so to speak.
Are you a daily Stoic guy or not?
I am.
Yeah,
Ryan and I have interacted a few times. The Stoics are huge for
yeah, they're
me.
good.
Yeah, it's a lot of, a lot of the stuff that I do is based in and around Stoicism
Mhm.
because it works.
Yeah, that makes sense. That makes sense now. Well, a couple things here, like I said, kind of three-pointers, somewhat rapid fire to finish. If you would want people to learn one thing from this talk, a takeaway and add value, if you will, and hold on to it, what would it be?
Discipline is the shortcut. The
Good,
fastest path between where you are and where you want to get is the path of discipline.
good.
Uh, there is a shortcut. It does exist because longer and shorter paths exist. The only way to decrease the amount of time it takes you to get where you want is increase the amount of discipline in all of the activities required to get there. There'll be a minimum, but if the option is 1 year or 8 years, which one's the shortcut?
Yeah,
1 year.
yeah.
Take it.
Next one, maybe be harsh with me if you need to here, but if you could have stepped in my shoes, what would have you asked today out of you that I did not ask?
I always think it's interesting to look at fail points. I think as somebody who does what I do, um, and puts out as much content as I put out and talks about the topics, I think a false belief, brand or impression gets put out there that I am good at all of the things that I talk about and teach, and that's just not the truth. I am, so many times what I'll write in Daily Discipline is something I either have struggled with or am struggling with. And through my own wrestling in my soul and my own wrestling and my behavior and my mindset, I am learning things about how to get better at something that, either I'm not good at or I'm struggling, whatever it would be.
Yeah.
And so I think, I always think talking about the fail points, right? Talking about those insecurities, talking about the gaps. I always find those to be interesting conversations because they're human conversations.
Well, ironically, that's probably one thing I had down. I just didn't get to it, but I love that. I guess in closing, then, good stuff's the name of this. Just something I say a lot, um, and just am about. Like, what can you give us here? Whether it's just some good stuff in closing, whether it's due to this time or just in general. Share with us some final good stuff, if you will, please.
Yeah. When I think about good stuff was the name of Good Stuff was the name of my favorite breakfast restaurant growing up on the beach in LA. And their tagline was "You are what you eat, so eat good stuff," which I always thought was smart, right? You are what you consume, so consume good stuff, from a content perspective, right? So with that in mind, what I want people to have right now is I want them to have an unflinching view of realism and a relentless commitment to optimism. That's true all the time. It's more important now than ever because you can't afford to lose touch with either one. You can't afford to lose touch with realism right now, and you can't afford to lose touch with optimism. I would say, anything that gravitates 50-50 or the increase of realism decreases your optimism, or increasing your optimism decreases your view of realism, those are all losing strategies, and they ultimately will saddle you with more emotion and anxiety that will harm you than anything else. Commit to being somebody who doesn't flinch to look at reality, but never let whatever your view of reality is to diminish your view of optimism that you will get where you want to go because you're capable. And so just combine those two rather than separate them. Unflinching realism combined with relentless optimism, and keep moving forward.
Yeah, I love it. Hey, what are some ways that the audience can connect with you? I know you're on a number of different social media outlets and website and all that stuff. Could you share with them,
Yep.
of course, as I mentioned, the Daily Discipline, we know about the YouTube video right now. What are some other ways you'd like them to connect with you?
Yeah, so obviously, you can connect with me anywhere on social, Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, LinkedIn, YouTube, at T Brian Kight. Last name is Kight. And then the Daily Discipline, there's two things that you can do. There's the Daily Discipline email that I send out every morning, Monday through Friday at 6 a.m. And then just last month, we launched the Daily Discipline community, which is what I wanted to do is I wanted to open up the opportunity for all of the readers. We've got about 30,000 people who read the email every day, and I get all of the replies. And so my team and I looked and said, these conversations ought to be happening with more people than just one-on-one in an email inbox. And so the Daily Discipline community is what we created first, so that people who wanted to discuss this and how it played a role in their work or their lives had a place to discuss it with me and with other readers, and connecting people from around the world. And then two, a place where I can provide deeper, more tactical and strategic resources around what I'm teaching in the Daily Discipline, but for more front lines. So that's that. And then you can always go to my website, which is tbriankight.com. And there's more videos on there, tools and resources for your teams and for your businesses.
Well, hey, I just want to thank you a ton, Brian, for spending time with us. This was really good. And I appreciate you, not only taking the time once again, but just continually doing what you're doing to impact people. So thank you very much.
It's a lot of fun. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, and I think, as I always kind of close with, I think we alluded to this a little bit earlier. It's one thing to hear the message, and another to apply it into your life somehow. And I think there's a lot of good stuff from today that you could definitely apply. So thanks for joining us. And until next time, good stuff.